their teachings originated from. So it's when someone sees something in the Gospel, the New Testament. One is Joel Osteen's Health and Wealth Gospel. The more you give, the more God will give back to you in this life. The verse in which he takes is when it says, whatever judgment you give will be given back to you, and whatever measure you give, it'll be given back to you twofold. Is that he takes that and twists it to his own destruction. And it's, yes, you will get some back in this life, but we're supposed to be storing treasures up in heaven. So this is the idea that we will eventually get back what we give to the Lord, but the idea is it's not all going to be back in this life. It's going to be given back to us in the life to come. That is what some people misunderstand. And there's an Old Testament example of loyalty, and it's the King Josiah. The story is in 2 Kings 22, and it's the story of King Josiah. And in verse 1 it says, Josiah was 8 years old when he became king. He reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jedidah, and daughter of Adiah of Bozkath. And he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, and walked all the ways of his father David, and did not turn aside to the right hand or to the other. And then continuing on, the story goes that that he finds the book of the law, and he has it read to him. And when he finds out what's in the book of the law, he tears his clothes, which tearing the clothes back in the Old Testament was a sign of great mourning and grieving. And here he rents his clothes and he starts weeping because Israel had not been following what the book of the law, what was written in the book of the law. So here, as the example of loyalty, he goes through and wipes out all forms of idolatry throughout Israel and restores the true worship, which is recorded here in the book of the law. And he makes a declaration in 2 Kings chapter 23, and it's in verse 3 where he starts. Then the king stood by a pillar and made a covenant before the Lord to follow the Lord and to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes, and with all his heart, with all his soul, to perform the words of this covenant that were written in this book. And all the people took a stand for the covenant. So this is where he restores true worship back into the temple. So that is how we are supposed to be, in the meaning of steadfast is being loyal. We're supposed to walk in the new covenant which the Lord has provided for us, just as Josiah restored true worship back to Israel, as they had fallen away in the previous kings and turned unto idolatry. Now the second definition was endurance. And the word steadfast for endurance is enduring hardships. I'd like to read from Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, if you turn there. And this is part of what is known as the Beatitudes. Beatitudes. And I'll be starting in verse 10. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 10. And it said, Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So here, being steadfast is enduring, even though all these people are speaking falsely against you, you do not let that influence your faith. It goes along with the parable of the soils. It would be where the stony ground, where the root, which is your faith, it could not go deep into the ground. So, and then the sun represents the persecution and cares of this world, that they would just wither away because they do not have deep enough root. We are supposed to be steadfast in our faith and have deep roots, so that when all this persecution comes upon us, that we may be able to withstand these hardships. In James chapter 1 and verse 12 says, "Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him." So it is the idea of enduring these temptations, the sun beating down on the plant, and whether or not you have deep enough root to withstand these temptations. Now, being in America, we may not suffer the same persecutions as, you say, Christians in the Middle East or over in China, where they are literally persecuted and have to assemble either underground or in secret. But that is, in America, it seems to be turning, the atheist community seems to be pushing harder for that, but we do not have that yet. Hopefully, God does not put that, and does not allow that to happen here. But the persecutions in which here in America we face is the persecutions against atheists. Like, there was this one article where it said a family in Florida, they were just holding a weekly Bible study Friday night. They would come together, have a Bible study in their home, and they had a sign in their front yard advertising that they had a prayer meeting and a Bible study on Friday nights. And a group of, they said it was a bunch of retired lawyers, ended up suing them and pressing charges because of zoning violations. Now, I'd say that would be a form of persecution here in America, where atheists, it's more of intolerance, per se. Some people are intolerant of Christianity, that they just can't stand it. They don't want to have to see it. That is the persecution in which us as Americans have to go through here. But as far as temptation goes, there is a way to get through temptations, and that's where it says in 1 Corinthians 10, where, if you want to know the specific verse, it's 10:13. But it's where God will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able, but with every temptation, make an escape that you may be able to bear it. So that is having those deep roots to trust in the Lord, that He will get you through, and that you look for that way of escape. It takes action upon your part to be able to endure these things. And there are some examples in which the Bible gives of endurance. Probably the most recognizable is the story of Job. How he had the world served up to him on a silver platter. He had beautiful daughters. He had more livestock than most of the men surrounding him. And then Satan challenges God that if he took away Job's possessions and his health, that he would curse God to his face. And so this was the things in which Job had to endure. And as we know, he had 3 friends who tried to get him, "Hey Job, God has all these things, is doing all these things unto you. What sin have you committed that you deserve this punishment?" That was one way in which they tried to get him to slip. And even his wife said, "Curse God and die." Now, just think about that. If you were going through a tough time in your life, and your wife, which is supposed to be your partner and cares for your well-being, to tell you just to curse God and die and be done with it. Just think of the agony Job had to go through, this woman in which he was devoted to